Chapter 1: A New Beginning and a Precious Keepsake. The morning sun peeked through the window, casting a soft glow over the room where Michelle stood. She stood before the mirror, taking in her reflection with a mixture of anticipation and nerves. Today was a big day. The kind of day that could change everything. The interview at the prestigious Thompson & Lewis law firm, one of the top firms in the city, was finally here. A fresh start in her career. And she knew this could be her ticket to a future she had worked so hard for. Her fingers gently traced the smooth surface of the pendant hanging from the delicate chain around her neck. The pendant wasn't anything special to anyone else, but to Michelle, it was everything. It had been her mother's. A simple, yet beautiful silver heart-shaped locket, its edges worn from years of tender care. Her mother had given it to her on her deathbed, her fragile fingers placing it around Michelle's neck with a soft, comforting smile. It was the one piece of her mother that Michelle carried with her every day, no matter what life threw at her. She knew her mother would have been proud to see her finally standing at the threshold of her dream career. "I wish you were here," Michelle whispered under her breath, her voice thick with emotion. "I really could use your strength today." The pendant seemed to pulse against her skin, as though responding to her words, a quiet reminder of the bond they shared. Michelle pressed the pendant gently to her lips, closing her eyes for a moment, trying to gather the courage she needed for the day ahead. Her mother had always been the strong one, the one who taught her that nothing in life came without hard work. That she could do anything if she just kept moving forward, no matter the obstacles. As Michelle took one last look at herself in the mirror, adjusting the collar of her crisp white blouse, she felt a rush of both excitement and fear. Her mother's lessons had been drilled into her since childhood, and now, standing on the precipice of her new life, they were the foundation of everything she was about to do. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was her father, always the steady rock in her life. He stepped into the room, his face warm with the love and support that had always defined their relationship. "Ready?" he asked with a gentle smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Not yet," Michelle replied with a half laugh, turning away from the mirror and adjusting the hem of her skirt. "But I will be." Her father chuckled softly, walking over to her with a reassuring presence. He placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You've got this, kiddo. I'm so proud of you." Michelle smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thanks, Dad. I want this so much." "I know," he said with a knowing look. "But you're not doing this alone, Michelle. Your mom is with you, always." She blinked back a few tears, swallowing the lump in her throat. Her father's words were always the comfort she needed, but they never fully alleviated the ache of missing her mother. As he walked away, Michelle reached up and touched the pendant once more, silently thanking her mother for everything she had taught her. Her father's words lingered in her mind as she made her way to the door, her heart thudding in her chest. "Mom's with you, always." That was something she needed to keep reminding herself of today. Outside, the city was alive with energy. The streets buzzed with the sound of cars, pedestrians hustling to their destinations, and the distant hum of the urban landscape. It was a beautiful, clear day, the sky a deep blue that stretched endlessly above. As Michelle walked towards the subway, she looked up for a moment, as if searching for a sign. For a moment, it almost felt like her mother was watching over her. There was a sense of peace in the air that felt like a comforting embrace. She took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp morning air. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The job interview at Thompson & Lewis was not just a job. It was the start of everything. A path leading her to the future she had always dreamed of, a future her mother had wanted for her. The firm was known for taking only the best and brightest, and Michelle had worked tirelessly for this opportunity. The long nights of study, the sacrifices she made to get to this point, it was all worth it now. The subway ride was a blur, her mind racing with thoughts of the interview. She rehearsed answers to potential questions, trying to mentally prepare herself for whatever Mr. Thompson or Ms. Lewis might ask her. She had learned everything about the firm, its history, its values, its key cases, and she was determined to make a lasting impression. But still, that nagging feeling of uncertainty sat in the pit of her stomach. What if she wasn't enough? What if the other candidates were better prepared, more confident, more experienced? Michelle pushed the doubts aside. She was here for a reason. She had the skills, the drive, and most importantly, the heart to succeed. When she arrived at the building, she stood in front of the towering glass structure for a moment, taking in its grandeur. The sleek modern design of Thompson & Lewis was a testament to its status as one of the best in the industry. The lobby was just as impressive, with marble floors, high ceilings, and the soft hum of busy professionals moving about. Michelle felt small in this grand space, but she didn't let it shake her. She had earned her place here. The receptionist smiled as she checked Michelle in, and soon, she was led to a waiting area filled with other candidates. They all sat in near perfect silence, their serious faces and poised postures radiating an air of confidence. Michelle couldn't help but feel out of place, surrounded by such polished individuals. They all seemed like characters straight out of a legal drama, exuding professionalism and expertise. The pressure was building. As she sat there, she felt a nervous chuckle bubbling up inside her. It was almost absurd how much they all looked the part. Unable to control it, Michelle let out a soft laugh, the sound cutting through the silence of the room. Instantly, every head turned in her direction. The eyes of the other candidates bored into her, their expressions a mix of surprise and curiosity. Michelle flushed, immediately feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. She dropped her head, hastily flipping through a magazine to divert attention, though her face remained flushed with embarrassment. Her stomach churned as she anxiously watched the others being called one by one for their interviews. The door to the office opened and closed in rapid succession, each candidate emerging with their face unreadable, the mystery of what happened behind those doors gnawing at her. The tension in the air was thick, and Michelle found herself growing more and more nervous with each passing minute. But she reminded herself, she had worked hard for this. And no matter what happened, she would keep moving forward. Just like her mother would have wanted. When her name was finally called, she stood up with a determined breath, smoothing out her suit as she walked toward the office door. This was it. The moment that would shape her future. Chapter 2, The Job Interview and Its Surprises. Michelle's heart raced as she walked down the sleek corridor to Mr. Thompson's office. Her hands were slightly clammy, but she held her head high, trying to project confidence, even if she didn't feel it. She adjusted her suit jacket one more time, smoothing down the fabric, as if she could erase the nerves with a simple flick of her hand. The receptionist had led her to the door, her pleasant smile offering a final bit of reassurance before Michelle was on her own. She glanced at the plaque on the door, Mr. Joshua Thompson, Senior Partner. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just any partner, it was the head of the firm, the man whose name was practically synonymous with legal excellence. She took another deep breath and knocked, the sound echoing down the hallway, amplifying her anxiety. A muffled voice from inside called, "Come in." The door swung open, revealing a spacious, tastefully decorated office. The walls were lined with shelves of law books, and a large mahogany desk dominated the center of the room. Behind it sat a man in his mid-40s, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his expression serious but not unkind. This was Mr. Thompson. His sharp eyes studied Michelle as she stepped in, a firm handshake awaiting her. "Miss Harris, it's a pleasure to meet you," he said, his voice deep and smooth, betraying a slight warmth. Michelle's stomach fluttered as she shook his hand, trying her best to maintain a steady grip. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Thompson. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me today." He motioned for her to sit, and she carefully settled into the chair opposite him. She tried to keep her posture perfect, every inch of her focusing on the interview ahead, even as her mind screamed with nerves. She could feel the weight of Mr. Thompson's gaze, as though he were measuring every move she made. "Let's get right to it," he began. "I've read your resume, and I have to say, your academic achievements are impressive. But I'm curious, what made you pursue law? What is it that drives you?" Michelle shifted in her seat, taking a deep breath. It wasn't the first time she had been asked this question, but it was still the hardest. Her mother's memory rose to the surface of her mind, her words echoing in Michelle's heart. "You can do anything, darling. Just stay true to what matters most to you." "Ever since I was little, I've been fascinated by justice," Michelle started, her voice steadying as she spoke. "It's not just about winning cases or being a good lawyer. It's about making sure people's voices are heard, about fighting for what's right. My mother taught me the importance of standing up for others, no matter the odds. That's why I chose this path." Mr. Thompson's eyebrows raised slightly, clearly impressed by her sincerity. "I like your perspective, Miss Harris. But let's be honest, we're looking for someone who can hit the ground running. A lot of people talk about their passion for justice, but we need someone who can deliver results." Michelle nodded, her heart pounding. She didn't have much experience to speak of, but she had plenty of ambition, and a willingness to learn. "I may not have the experience you're looking for, Mr. Thompson, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to grow. I'll work tirelessly, ask questions when I need to, and I'll give my absolute best every single day. I want to learn from the best." The words felt right coming out of her mouth, though she could feel the vulnerability in them. Still, she pushed forward. "Stay true to yourself, Michelle." The reminder of her mother's voice gave her the strength to speak with even more conviction. "I may not have a long track record, But I have a passion for this work that's undeniable. And I'm eager to prove myself. Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping thoughtfully against his desk. He was silent for a moment, his gaze not leaving Michelle. It was as if he were weighing her every word, studying her for something that went beyond the surface. Finally, he nodded. "You're right, Miss Harris," he said. "What matters most to me isn't experience or credentials. It's enthusiasm, the willingness to learn, and the ability to be authentic. Your honesty is refreshing." He gave her a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You've done well, but there are a few more candidates to consider." Michelle's stomach twisted. She had hoped her honesty would make an impact, but she wasn't sure if it was enough. She gave a tight-lipped smile, trying to keep her composure. The interview stretched on, the questions turning to her coursework, the internships she had undertaken during her time at law school. She did her best to answer each one clearly, but a part of her mind couldn't help but wonder what the other candidates were saying, what experience they might have that she didn't. Every time she answered, she imagined the others already impressing Mr. Thompson with their polished answers and years of experience. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Mr. Thompson stood up, signaling the end of the interview. "I'll let you know the decision in a few days, Miss Harris. Thank you for your time," he said, extending his hand again. Michelle stood and shook his hand, her mind racing. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I really appreciate the opportunity." As she turned to leave, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and disappointment. She had done her best, but was it enough? She knew she couldn't control what happened next, but she hoped she had made the right impression. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and Michelle stood in the hallway for a moment, trying to regain her bearings. It had been everything she had hoped for and more, but now, the waiting game began. Chapter 3, The Pendant's True Story. As Michelle walked down the hallway, her heart still racing from the intense interview, a strange feeling settled in her chest. It was a mixture of both relief and lingering anxiety. She had done her best, but now all she could do was wait for the decision, a feeling that made her restless. The air seemed heavier now as she made her way toward the elevator, the sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor echoing in the otherwise quiet building. She had just stepped into the elevator when her phone buzzed in her bag. Startled, she pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from her father. "How did it go? Let me know as soon as you're done." A smile tugged at her lips. Despite her nerves, she appreciated his constant support. She quickly typed out a reply, "Just finished. I think it went okay. I'll let you know when I hear back." Michelle couldn't help but wonder if she had made a lasting impression. Mr. Thompson had seemed impressed with her passion, but she knew that in the competitive world of law, passion alone wasn't enough. Experience, connections, and a solid track record were what truly set candidates apart. She had tried to convey her enthusiasm and willingness to grow, but what if it wasn't enough? The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Michelle stepped out, her mind still swirling with thoughts of the interview. But as she moved toward the lobby, her gaze dropped to the pendant she still wore around her neck. The locket, a gift from her mother, had been with her through so much: graduation, heartache, joy, and now, her first big career step. It was funny, Michelle thought. This small, simple piece of jewelry held so much significance in her life. It was a reminder of her mother's love and the unwavering belief her mother had always shown in her. Even now, as she walked through the glass doors of the building and into the bustling city streets, the pendant felt like a connection to something greater. Michelle's thoughts were interrupted by a voice calling her name. "Miss Harris." She turned, surprised to see Mr. Thompson walking briskly toward her. He was holding a briefcase, and his usual air of professionalism was tempered by the unexpected urgency in his steps. His face looked serious but kind. "Mr. Thompson," Michelle said, startled but trying to keep her voice calm. "Is everything okay? I hope I'm not catching you off guard," he began, his tone a little less formal than it had been during the interview. "But I noticed something just now, something I didn't get a chance to ask you about earlier." Michelle blinked, confused. "What is it?" Mr. Thompson glanced down at the pendant around her neck. Michelle instinctively touched it, the familiar weight bringing her comfort. "That pendant," he said quietly. "Where did you get it?" For a split second, Michelle felt a knot in her stomach. The pendant was such an intimate part of her, it had always been hers and her mother's, something that she never thought anyone outside her immediate family would care to ask about. But Mr. Thompson's gaze was steady, his expression thoughtful, as if the pendant was more than just a trinket to him. Without thinking, Michelle touched the pendant again, a slight smile on her lips. "It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she passed away," she said softly. It's been in our family for as long as I can remember. Mr. Thompson's eyes widened, his brows furrowing as if he had been struck by a sudden realization. He took a step closer to her, his voice quieter now. Your mother, he repeated, almost as if the words carried a weight that Michelle didn't fully understand. Yes, Michelle replied, still puzzled by his reaction. She was my everything. I wear it to keep her close. Mr. Thompson took another step forward, his gaze never leaving the pendant. His voice grew serious as he spoke. Miss Harris, I have to be honest with you. The pendant you're wearing. It's identical to one I've kept with me for years. Michelle's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? You have the same pendant? Mr. Thompson nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting something that Michelle couldn't quite place. I do. It's strange, but that pendant has been with me since I was a child. My father, a jeweler, made 2 of them. One for me, and one for my sister. He paused, his voice dropping. But we lost contact after we were separated as children. I haven't seen her in years. Michelle felt a wave of shock and disbelief wash over her. She was almost certain she had misheard him. Your sister? Mr. Thompson's face softened, the hardness of his expression melting into something far more vulnerable. Yes. My sister, he said quietly. She was taken from me when we were very young. After our parents died, we were sent to different foster homes, and over the years, I lost track of her. I've searched for her for years, but... His voice trailed off, a deep sadness creeping into his words. The pieces were starting to fit together in Michelle's mind, but she couldn't believe what was unfolding. So, you're telling me? Her voice caught as she tried to make sense of the situation. You think my mother was your sister? Mr. Thompson nodded, his eyes now filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. I can't say for sure, but the pendant. He took a deep breath. The pendant was something my father made for us. And if your mother has the other one? His voice trailed off, the weight of the discovery settling on both of them. Michelle stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. She had always known that her mother had a history, a life before her, but she had never imagined something like this. The revelation hit her like a wave. Her mother had a brother. And that brother was Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice trembling, if that's true, then... I think I'm your niece. A long silence followed, each of them processing the impossible truth. Mr. Thompson's eyes filled with emotion, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the pendant around his neck, lifting it for Michelle to see. It was the same as hers, a perfect match. They both stared at the 2 identical pendants in their hands, the connection undeniable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them seemed to stand still, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. Michelle could hardly believe what was happening. She had come to the interview hoping for a job, but instead, she had found something far more incredible, a link to her mother's past and a family she had never known she had. Finally, Mr. Thompson spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I never thought I'd find her. And now, here you are, with the same pendant. I don't know what to say. Michelle felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. This was the moment she had never even dreamed of, the moment when the past and the present collided, forever changing the course of her life. And somehow, in the midst of it all, she was beginning to understand something deeper. Her mother hadn't just been a woman with a history. She had been part of a family that Michelle was only now beginning to know. Mr. Thompson, I think we have a lot to talk about, Michelle said, her voice shaking but filled with newfound certainty. Chapter 4, Uncovering the Past. The world around Michelle seemed to slow down as she stood there, her hand still clutching the pendant, her mind reeling from the revelation that Mr. Thompson was not just a potential employer, but her long-lost uncle. The connection between them, which had been hidden for so many years, was like a thread that had suddenly been pulled, unraveling a story Michelle never imagined could be true. She blinked a few times, trying to make sense of it all. The words Mr. Thompson had spoken echoed in her mind, but they didn't seem real. She had always thought her mother's history was a closed book, a part of her life that was never shared. But now, she was standing in front of the man who had been searching for his sister, Michelle's mother, for years. Mr. Thompson seemed to be just as stunned, though he quickly regained his composure. His face had softened, the tough exterior he had worn during the interview replaced by something more vulnerable, more human. He cleared his throat, as if trying to gather his thoughts, before speaking again. Michelle, he began, his voice unsteady, I can't believe this. I've been looking for my sister for so long, but I never imagined I'd find her this way. I didn't even know she had a daughter. Michelle shook her head, still trying to wrap her mind around the situation. I didn't know either, she replied softly, her voice trembling. I knew my mom had been adopted, but she never talked about her past. She always said that part of her life was behind her. But now I find out she had a brother, someone who has been looking for her for all these years? Mr. Thompson took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair as he tried to calm himself. I should have known. The pendant, it's the same as the one my father gave me. The only difference is that it's been passed down through the years, and now you're wearing it. I don't even know what to say. Michelle didn't know what to say either. Her mind was spinning. The only thing that felt certain was the fact that she now knew something about her mother's past that she had never even considered. She had never imagined that her mother had a family, an uncle, cousins, a whole history that she was unaware of. Do you think my mom knew who you were? Michelle asked, her voice tentative. Did she know about you? Mr. Thompson's expression darkened, and he glanced down at the pendant in his hand as if searching for answers. I don't know. I never had the chance to ask her. When my parents died, we were both just kids. They sent us to different homes, and we lost touch. Over the years, I tried to find her, but the records were lost, and I never had a clear way to track her down. It was a long, frustrating search. And when I gave up, I thought I'd never know what happened to her. He looked up at Michelle, his eyes filled with regret. If I'd known where she was, I would have found her. I would have done anything to bring us back together. But now, here you are. And it's overwhelming. Michelle felt a mix of sadness and empathy for Mr. Thompson. He had been carrying this weight for so many years, and now, in the most unexpected of ways, he was learning that his sister's story hadn't ended in silence. Her mother's life had continued, and it had led to Michelle standing here in front of him, a part of the family he had lost long ago. I'm sorry, Michelle whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry that you lost so much time. Mr. Thompson shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. There's nothing to apologize for. You weren't the one who kept us apart. Life has a way of throwing curveballs. But now, we have a chance to make up for lost time. We can finally reconnect. And I want to know everything about my sister. I want to know what she was like, what her life was like after we were separated. Michelle felt the tears welling up in her eyes. This moment, this connection, was so much more than she had ever expected. She had walked into this office for an interview, hoping to land her first big job, and instead, she was uncovering pieces of her own family history, something that had been hidden for decades. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie. But it was real. And it was happening. I want to tell you everything, Michelle said, her voice breaking slightly. I want you to know everything about her. I've kept her memories with me all these years, and I've always wondered about her life before me. I didn't know she had a brother, but I knew she had a past. I just never knew what it was. Mr. Thompson nodded, his expression gentle but filled with longing. I need to hear about her. I need to know who she became after everything fell apart. And I want to hear about you, Michelle. I want to know about your life, about your mother's life, and about how she raised you. They sat down together at a nearby bench in the lobby, the noise of the bustling city outside muffled by the walls of the building. It felt strange to sit so casually after such a monumental discovery, but it was the only way to begin. The two of them, strangers just an hour ago, were now connected by the thin thread of family, a thread that had been hidden in plain sight for so long. For hours, Michelle shared stories of her mother, about the love, the care, and the lessons she had imparted. She talked about her mother's quiet strength, her selflessness, and her unwavering devotion to family. Michelle showed Mr. Thompson photos, memories that had been tucked away in her phone, pictures of her mother as a young woman, photos of the two of them together, and snapshots from the moments they had shared. Each photo was a small piece of the puzzle that connected her mother to him. As Michelle spoke, she could see the emotion in Mr. Thompson's eyes, the way he listened so intently, as if each word was a treasure. She could tell that this was not just a reunion for him, it was a chance to reclaim something he had lost long ago. Finally, after hours of conversation, Michelle took a deep breath. I think we've covered a lot, she said quietly. And I know I've told you so much, but there's still so much more I want to share. Mr. Thompson smiled, wiping a tear from his eye. There's no rush, Michelle. We've just started. We have all the time in the world now. Michelle nodded, feeling a deep sense of relief. The connection with Mr. Thompson was real, and it was growing stronger with every passing minute. They were no longer strangers. They were family, and that bond was undeniable. We'll make up for lost time, Michelle said, her voice filled with determination. I promise. Chapter 5, Rebuilding the Family. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and discoveries for Michelle. What had started as an ordinary job interview had quickly transformed into something much more profound. She had walked into Mr. Thompson's office hoping to secure her first real position as a lawyer, but instead, she had found a family she never knew existed. The connection with her uncle had deepened in a way she couldn't have predicted, and the bond between them began to grow stronger with each meeting. After that first emotional conversation, Michelle and Mr. Thompson met regularly, sharing stories of their lives, their memories, and their experiences. Mr. Thompson was eager to learn everything about his sister, Michelle's mother. He asked about her childhood, her dreams, and the life she had built after they had been separated. In turn, Michelle shared stories about the woman who had raised her with so much love and care. She showed him old family photos, told him about her mother's quiet strength, and described the values her mother had instilled in her. Through Michelle's stories, Mr. Thompson began to paint a picture of his sister, the woman he had lost so long ago. For Michelle, the experience was both healing and bittersweet. As she spoke about her mother, she realized just how much she had missed out on. Her mother had never spoken of her past, and Michelle had always assumed it was a chapter she had left behind. But now, through Mr. Thompson's eyes, Michelle saw that her mother's life had been filled with so much more than she had known. Her mother had been part of a family, a brother who had loved her and longed to be reunited with her. And now, Michelle was the bridge between them, a living connection to the past. One afternoon, Mr. Thompson invited Michelle to his home. He had 2 children, both in their late teens, and he was eager for Michelle to meet her cousins. The idea of meeting them filled Michelle with excitement and anxiety. She had never imagined she would have family beyond her parents, let alone cousins her own age. The thought of meeting them brought both joy and nervousness, but Michelle was determined to make this new chapter in her life a positive one. When she arrived at Mr. Thompson's house, she was greeted by a warm, welcoming atmosphere. His wife, Sarah, was in the kitchen preparing lunch, and his children, Jack and Lily, were sitting in the living room, both absorbed in their own activities. Mr. Thompson stood in the doorway, smiling as he motioned Michelle inside. "Come on in, Michelle," he said, his voice filled with pride. "I want you to meet my kids." Michelle smiled, her heart beating a little faster. She stepped into the living room, where Jack and Lily looked up from their books and phones. They were both tall, with striking features that reminded Michelle of her uncle. Jack, the older of the two, had the same sharp jawline and deep-set eyes as Mr. Thompson, while Lily, with her soft curls and warm smile, looked every bit like a younger version of her aunt. "Hi, I'm Jack," the older of the two said, standing up to shake Michelle's hand. "Nice to meet you." "Hi, I'm Lily," the younger one added with a friendly smile. "We've heard so much about you. It's nice to finally meet you." Michelle was immediately struck by how warm and open they both were. She had imagined that meeting her cousins would be awkward, but instead, it felt surprisingly natural. There was a sense of familiarity, as if they had always known each other, even though they had just met. Michelle was grateful for their easygoing nature and their willingness to include her in their family so quickly. As they all sat down to lunch, the conversation flowed effortlessly. Mr. Thompson and his family were eager to learn more about Michelle's life, and Michelle was equally eager to hear about theirs. Jack and Lily told her about their school experiences, their hobbies, and their plans for the future. They were both smart, ambitious, and full of energy, and Michelle couldn't help but feel a sense of pride for her newfound family. After lunch, they spent the afternoon talking and laughing, getting to know each other better. It was a moment of pure joy for Michelle. She had never imagined that she would be sitting around a table, laughing with her cousins, feeling like she belonged. It felt like she had finally found a place in the world that she hadn't known she had been searching for. In that moment, she realized how much she had missed out on, but also how much she had gained in such a short time. As the day came to an end, Mr. Thompson walked Michelle to the door, his arm around her shoulders. "I'm so glad you came today," he said, his voice warm and sincere. "It means a lot to me that you're here. You've become such an important part of this family already." Michelle smiled, her heart full. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I'm so grateful to be here, with all of you. It feels like I've found something I didn't even know I was missing." As she left their home, Michelle couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. She had come into Mr. Thompson's life as a niece, a stranger to him, but she had quickly become an irreplaceable part of their family. And in return, she had found a family that she never knew she had, a family that welcomed her with open arms and open hearts. Over the next few weeks, Michelle's bond with her uncle and cousins continued to grow. She began to visit them regularly, sharing meals, stories, and laughter. As she spent more time with them, she learned more about her mother's past and the family she had left behind. The more she learned, the more she understood how much her mother had sacrificed to create a new life for Michelle, a life that was filled with love and care. In the office, Michelle also thrived. She dove into her work with determination and enthusiasm, showing Mr. Thompson and the rest of the team just how capable she was. Her passion for law, combined with her newfound sense of family, fueled her ambition and drive. Over time, she earned the respect of her colleagues, and Mr. Thompson took her under his wing, mentoring her with patience and care. Michelle soon realized that the unexpected twists of life had brought her exactly where she was meant to be. She had found her place, not just in the world of law, but in the arms of a family she never knew existed, and as the days passed, she felt more and more connected to her mother's memory, her uncle's love, and the family she had always dreamed of having. The missing pieces of her life were finally falling into place, and for the first time in a long time, Michelle felt whole.
If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us and motivates us to continue sharing heartwarming, inspiring stories almost every day.